Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 18 of the Tick Bootcamp podcast. The title of today's interview is Tailor Made Remission Protocol, an interview with Taylor Scott. My name is Richard Johannesson.
And I'm Matt Sabatello.
Today's podcast guest is Taylor Scott, an Illinois transplant residing in San Diego, California. Ms. Scott was living a full life that included a marriage, graduate school, a full-time job, and weekends filled with volunteer service. A people pleaser by nature, Ms. Scott had a busy social life. In 2017, Ms. Scott began to grow increasingly ill. She began feeling the symptoms of colds and tingling to her hands and feet, which graduated to lengthy periods of flu symptoms, fatigue, and anxiety. Finally, her symptoms grew to include canker sores, hair loss, sensitivity to light, tinnitus, and full-body paralysis. Ms. Scott visited with scores of doctors and submitted to a full range of tests that resulted in several false diagnoses, including chronic strep and the beginning stages of multiple sclerosis. Ms. Scott knew in her gut that she needed to find a doctor that could properly diagnose her illness. Finally, she followed the advice of a friend in Illinois that had been suffering from Lyme disease, and under the guidance of a naturopathic doctor, took several hygienic blood tests and was diagnosed with several tick diseases, including Lyme disease. Ms. Scott decided to forego traditional antibiotic therapies and pursued an immune-enhancing protocol that included a clean diet that removed all gluten, bread, and sugars. She also utilized the blends of 5 traditional Chinese herbs. She enhanced the treatment protocol by utilizing infrared saunas and natural products. Ms. Scott has regained approximately 85% of a pre-tick disease life and is working full-time at her dream job.
Taylor, can you please describe what your life was like before you got sick?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Southern Illinois, and, my grandparents lived right next door. They were farmers, and so I was always out in the woods, always being very active. I had a pretty normal childhood, up through high school, and then more into college. I had a really good undergraduate kind of college experience, probably partied way too hard, like most, but for the most part, my entire life before Lyme disease was fairly, standard. And I think the end of, my undergraduate degree in college, I really started to focus on, my health and exercise and taking care of myself, or what I thought at that time was taking care of myself, And so I got really into fitness and everything like that. And then right after that, I started my master's degree in human resource management. I had moved with my ex-husband to Virginia, and from there I really started to, throw myself into working all the time, really threw myself into my academics. I volunteered on the weekends, and I was a really busybody. And one of the things before Lyme disease was also my perspective that has changed completely. And, I think before I was really worried about, materialistic things and looking a certain way and doing certain things, trying to uphold an image to say. And so what all of this really was just, being very stressed all the time, a workaholic, and, but yeah, still focusing on fitness and things in the grander scheme that didn't necessarily matter so much. But yeah, I would say, my entire life was pretty standard for, what we all kind of go through. Yeah.
So Taylor, your life before getting sick was a typical life, very similar to mostly everybody else out there. You went to school, you were having a social life, you had friends, you exercised, and then all of a sudden you started to feel sick. Can you describe that transition?
Yeah, absolutely. So around the fall of 2016, I started to develop, minuscule symptoms of just, not feeling the great. Always feel like I was coming on with a cold, or, I started getting like minor tingles in like my hands and my feet. I had insomnia, but nothing too crazy to where I thought, there was an emergency. And so I think it was around February 2017. One night I had got back from the zoo, and I just felt bad. And that whole night I had flu-like symptoms, just standard flu-like symptoms. And I woke up the next day and I didn't feel better. But it wasn't like a normal flu. Like I could tell my body wasn't fighting whatever this was off. So, as the days dragged on, the whole flu-like illness never went away. Probably 5 days after that initial night, I woke up one morning and I'm trying to get ready for church, and the whole right side of my body just goes completely numb and weak. I lost vision in my right eye, and I was just dizzy. And of course, at that time, I'm panicking, thinking, oh my gosh, am I having a stroke? Like, what is happening? So, I still tried to go volunteer and be the workaholic that I am. And I ended up having to go to the ER. When I went to the ER, they ran all these blood tests and everything came back fine. So they had originally diagnosed me with severe anxiety. And so I left, just not feeling good at all, but wondering, okay, like I know I'm stressed, but, I didn't think that was the cause. And so probably 2 weeks after that, my symptoms did not get better. And so I went and saw a primary care physician in Virginia, and she ran some more tests. One of the tests that she actually ran was a standard CDC Lyme disease test. And before I got that done, I had to sign a waiver that said just because or if, this test comes back negative doesn't mean you don't have Lyme disease. Basically, I would like to say it was stating that the test can be inaccurate. And so I got tested for Lyme disease and it came back negative the first time. And so, but my other blood test came back high in antibodies towards the Epstein-Barr virus. So from that primary care physician, I was diagnosed with mono. And, she said, oh, your symptoms will go away in about 2 weeks. But I thought it was odd because I didn't have any mono symptoms. I didn't have swollen lymph nodes, sore throat, anything like that. So for the next couple of weeks, my symptoms still did not go away. I went back to the primary care physician and I told her what was going on. And she said, it could take months for mono to go away. And so from that, I kind of stayed on the path of okay, I have mono. Okay, I have mono. And so that was kind of the first stages of the Lyme disease. And, some of the symptoms that came with the first stages of when I got sick, obviously the weakness in the right side, loss of vision. I had chronic fatigue. I had extreme exhaustion after working out, exercising. I had brain fog, shakiness. I had, tingling in my hands and feet. I found that I bruised really easily. I still had some flu-like symptoms. I had tinnitus, and that's one of the things that threw me. I had no idea what tinnitus was, and it's ringing in your ears. And so anyway, from that, we moved from Virginia. My ex-husband went off to training in the desert, and he was in the military. And so I had moved back to Illinois for a little bit of time. And that's whenever the second stage really hit me. I went in for a checkup. We thought we were moving to Japan, me and my ex-husband. So I went in for a checkup and to get a physical. I had to get some shots and everything like that. And, I told him what was happening, and I said, I just don't feel good. I feel so bad. And, he looked me over and he looked down at my feet and he saw that they were basically purple. And he said, well, you have Raynaud's disease. And I said, well, what's that? And, he said, whenever the blood's not circulating well enough in your body and it's cutting off, basically blood flow to your feet and your hands. And I said, well, why is this happening? And he's like, I don't know, some things just happen. And I had to think, okay, sure. And so, and then he, he looked at me and he was like, oh, you go have fun. You're way too young to die, blah, 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 and I'm like, okay. So anyway, after that second stage, after I'd gotten a physical and, everything through them, my symptoms got dramatically worse. I started to experience limb paralysis. I got eye floaters. The bladder retention started to where I would have to, go to the bathroom more frequently. I would stop mid, going to the bathroom, and I'd have to concentrate on going. It was really weird. And heart palpitations. I just remember laying in bed one time, and I was at my parents' house, and my heart is just freaking out. And I go in there and I was like, I'm having chest pains. My heart is not beating regularly. And, we didn't know what to do. I didn't end up going to the hospital because it went away. But during this time, I was seeing a primary care physician in back home, and I was in there every week with a new symptom. I went in there once because right after the physical, probably hours after my physical, my legs just started burning like crazy. And so I would come back every week with these new symptoms, and sometimes my doctor would get on Google and have to look at stuff. And so she had initially diagnosed me with depression and anxiety, wanted to put me on medication for that, wanted to put me on calcium channel blockers for the Raynaud's, all of these prescriptions to help symptoms, I guess. And so anyway, and then I knew that there was really something wrong and my body was declining quickly is whenever my hands started shaking really bad. I could no longer control parts of my nervous system, kind of like a Parkinson's. And so, my hands and everything started shaking really bad. So that kind of spiraled me into the third stage of the Lyme disease that I went into, the really powerful, oh my gosh, something is really, really wrong. And this whole time, everybody, and the doctors kept saying oh, you have mono, it'll go away. Well, by this time, I had moved out into the desert with my ex-husband. I began having, really bad sensory disorder, sensitivity to light, to sound, to touch. I couldn't hold things for very long because it felt like my bones were just freezing. So with the uncontrollable shaking, I developed cancer sores. I remember I got my first nosebleed. I've never had a nosebleed before. And it was just, gushing blood and wouldn't stop. So that was freaky. I had extreme paranoia. I remember I used to go to this movie theater and watch movies, and I would just be in a panic the whole time because I was afraid, there's going to be an active shooter, or, the extreme paranoia hindered my ability to drive a car even because I didn't feel comfortable enough driving. I had dizziness, full body, temporary paralysis, after I would wake up, so I wouldn't be able to move at all. I had a loss of motor skills. One time I forgot how to brush my teeth, because I couldn't tell my hands how to basically, move in the motion to brush my teeth. I had busted blood vessels in my feet, severe ADHD, and then I was starting to lose my hair as well. Yeah, and this whole time, I'm still seeing doctors, going to the ER, and I had also been diagnosed with chronic strep throat because I had, these sores in the back of my mouth, and I could hardly swallow most times, and nobody could figure out what was wrong, so they diagnosed it with strep throat. But yeah, so that was, for about 6 months, that was my Lyme progression, and it happened so quickly, I thought, as in comparison to other stories that I've heard. So around that time, I knew that something had to be done. I had to get accurately tested and everything like that.
Taylor, I'm going to interrupt real quick. So
yeah,
for many of your symptoms, starting from the beginning all the way to the end, are consistent with common Lyme disease symptoms, ranging from flu-like symptoms, numbness and weakness in your limbs, loss of vision, tingling, anxiety, tinnitus or ringing in your ears, heart issues. You had your heart palpitations, chronic fatigue, light and sound sensitivity, being lightheaded, having brain fog, having hair loss. These are all symptoms that many of others have described to us in previous podcasts and discussions, and that are well-known Lyme symptoms for neurological Lyme and Lyme carditis, which is your heart being affected by Lyme. Throughout this 3 phases of your journey, did any of your doctors or any of the ER doctors ever push the idea of Lyme other than that one test where you had to sign that disclaimer to say, I understand it may not be accurate?
No. So, they had asked me before, and here's where, part of my mistake comes in. I guess it's not my mistake, but a lot of them, have said, okay, well, tell me what doctor you've been seeing, what they've been saying, all of these things. And so I said, well, I was in Virginia, I got tested for Lyme disease. It came back negative. And so right there, because of that CDC test being negative, that canceled out any thought that the doctors would have of Lyme disease. The doctor that actually diagnosed me with Raynaud's disease, he had talked about Lyme disease actually, and he had said, sometimes we don't have enough accurate tests out there to appropriately diagnose somebody, so we have to start treating Lyme disease based off symptoms now versus, accurate testing. And I thought that was really progressive. But that's really the only mention of Lyme disease that any of the doctors had said.
So this took you about a 1-year journey to go through these 3 phases that you outlined from the time you were 23 to about 24. And then when you were 24, you got your Lyme diagnosis. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was this girl from my hometown who also had Lyme disease. And, fortunately, when I was going through the kind of second stage of like my Lyme disease progression and I was in Illinois, something was just telling me like, hang out with her, learn from her, all of these things. And so I learned a lot about Lyme disease then. And what made me go get accurately tested is I had just gotten groceries and I was trying to put them away in the fridge, and I just sat down on the floor and I cried because I didn't even have enough strength to put away my groceries anymore. And so, she had repeatedly told me like, okay, there's a place to get accurately tested. You should go do this, blah, 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 blah. And I put it off because I wanted to believe what all of the doctors were telling me. And so eventually when I was at my worst, I went and got tested for Lyme disease, and that took about a month to get tested. And so I had to write down all of my symptoms, and everything like that. So the Lyme test that I got done was actually IGeneX, and it's really in depth. And it had come back that, I had not only Lyme disease, but I had also had 3 other co-infections, and then the Epstein-Barr virus, of course.
How many doctors did you see, Taylor, before you got your Lyme diagnosis?
Roughly 8.
And you mentioned some other diagnoses that you received before Lyme that were not correct. Fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, anxiety, depression, chronic strep throat. And throughout all of these doctors, did you really believe that that's what you had? Or were you just sort of in the back of your head thinking, I don't really see how this fits, but I'm just going to put my trust in the doctor?
Well, for them, I was torn because obviously, you listen to doctors and they go through, all these years of medical school and you want to put all of your trust in them. So a part of me was like, no, Taylor, like you are crazy. Like, like they're trying to tell me that I am. And then the other part of me is like, whoa, like I know my body, and I'm not, And so it was hard to accept, what they were telling me. I had a doctor tell me, well, it sounds like you have the beginning stages of MS, and I got diagnosed with hyperthyroidism too. But anyway, they're like, we think, you have all of these things. And so my next step actually before going to get accurately tested was going to a rheumatologist for all of my problems. And so I just stopped and I thought, if I go to a rheumatologist and, they diagnose me with all of these autoimmune diseases, like I'm not living my life like that. Like I'm not doing that, and I said, I've got to figure out what is actually wrong with me. So I was torn,
It's an emotional struggle because on one hand, you want to believe them and try to get better. But on the other hand, you question what they're saying because there's something deeper going on. Taylor, once you got this diagnosis and you had the positive IGeneX blood test for both Lyme and the 3 other tick diseases, what was your course of action to treat and heal from the Lyme?
So the day that I got my test results back, it was really it was the day that changed my life. I kind of suspected, I had Lyme disease because of the amount of research I had done before that. But I told myself, I said, I will never be this sick again. And I actually remember, being in like my 3rd stage of Lyme, and I was walking and I was pleading with God. I said, if you give me one more chance at health, like I will never, I will take advantage of it. Like, if you just give me one more chance to be well again, one more chance to be normal. And so like, once I got that accurate diagnosis and I said, this is enough, like I am done being sick. And so one of the very first things that I did, and I see like a lot of Lyme patients have, positive outcomes of this, is I changed my diet completely. I went to a anti-inflammatory diet, which consisted of no gluten, no dairy, no corn, no tomatoes, no soy, no eggs, and no sugar. It was really about cutting out the inflammation and, helping my gut heal, because your gut is where your immune system is held. So that was my very first step. I also switched to like grass-fed beef, free-range chicken. non-GMO foods, organic foods, and filtered water. So I use like the zero water filter, which is like takes out 99% of, everything. So yeah. And then along with the diet, one of the very first steps before I could even get to a Lyme doctor, was removing toxins. So, looking at the cleaning supplies, looking at my makeup, getting a shower filter, just everything that surrounded me that was toxic, from the air that I breathed to, the stuff that I put on my skin, getting all natural, everything. That was kind of the first step. After that, I was able to go see my Lyme doctor, who is actually a naturopathic doctor, in San Diego. And, we sat down, we went over my entire medical history, and we had talked, about treatment plans. And for me, I, at the time, was so disgusted with how I was treated previously, that I didn't want to do anything with pharmaceuticals. I was done. And so I took the completely holistic approach to the naturopathic approach to Lyme disease treatment, which started off with, knowing your body. So knowing everything that was wrong with my body. So I knew that I had, Lyme disease and all of these bacteria inside of me, but that was only one area. I also got tested for heavy metals, which that's a little uncommon thing to hear. Of course you've heard of like lead poisoning and all of that. But I had to get tested for heavy metals. And, what they found is I was really high in lead, mercury, cadmium, tungsten, and antimony, and I was in the red, and it was like screaming at me like, oh my gosh, you've got a heavy metal overload. So one of the very first things that we did for my Lyme disease treatment was detox. It was getting these heavy metals out. It was getting on a really strict diet. It was using infrared saunas. It was using binders such as activated charcoal, detox baths, anything to get the toxins out and start reversing the damage that was done. We then added in, a few herbs here and there to test, what strand of bacteria was the strongest, resisting to what herbs and stuff like that. In the end, what helped put my Lyme disease in remission was a mix of 5 Chinese herbs that I took for about 2 to 3 months. And through that, I also took part in yoga. So I was such a huge fitness fanatic, but I started doing yoga and everything like that. So initially, that is what had put my Lyme disease in remission the first time, was really just, getting the bad out and putting the good in.
So Tailor, you totally went the holistic approach at that point and never used any antibiotics during your treatment. Is that correct?
Yes.
And looking back, is that something that you still support, or is that something that you would have changed if you know what you know now today?
I think that everybody's body is different. I chose not to do antibiotics for, personal reasons. I had also watched other people with Lyme disease go through antibiotic treatment with no avail, and I see people that, may be suffering because of it. But I just chose not to do that for a personal choice. I thought, I've done enough harm to my body over the years, and this is why it's not working. It's like, I need it to give my body, I need to be kind to it. So I chose not to do the antibiotics.
Yeah, and from what we see, Tailor, and we're not advocating one over another, but we've seen most people we have had discussions with that solely rely on antibiotics to heal from Lyme after going quite some time without a diagnosis, whether it be a year or 10 years or 15 years, and they have the neurological Lyme symptoms and the severe Lyme carditis, that it generally does not cure them and bring them back to health.
I also wanted to note that, just recently, so I was in remission for about 6 or 7 months, after the initial treatment. And then I had actually moved into an apartment that I found out had toxic mold probably about 4 months after living there. And a lot of times people with relapses or, whenever they get sick with Lyme, they find these stressors or these trigger events. And so I was living in this apartment with toxic mold and I had no idea. And it made me basically relapse on Lyme disease, but also it gave me all of these symptoms of toxic mold. And I think that that's another thing, people should be aware of is like, is your environment clean? Without a clean environment, you won't be able to heal properly. And so I have actually relapsed on Lyme, but since that relapse, and it took me probably, 8 months to put myself back into remission. My body started being resistant to the 5, Chinese herbs that I had taken originally. So I had to, come up with new plans to get better.
And I think it's important to note that generally after you're treated for Lyme disease, we believe at least, and I think, further research and the future will tell us that the Lyme bacteria never really fully gets eradicated or removed from your body. So we're still super sensitive to things like mold and other things like that than we were before. So we have to do our best to keep ourselves in a clean environment, live a healthy life, eat a healthy diet, take the appropriate supplements, and just remember that we got to keep our stress down because we can have a relapse, and then it's going to be a struggle to recover from that, and not to get upset if we do have a relapse because we will rebound, and to have a positive mindset throughout this healing journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when I had relapsed and I realized that the herbs that I took before weren't working and I was detoxing, I was doing all of these things to help myself and I just couldn't figure it out, So I also realized that during that time, along with the mold stressor, I had gotten a staph infection from a gym. And so, not only is my immune system poor in general because I have Lyme disease, now I'm trying to fight off the staph infection. And, don't get me wrong, like there were times when I wanted to throw in the towel and I'm just like, put me on antibiotics, let's do this. And I had actually, for the staph infection, I had taken a round of antibiotics to heal it or to, cure the staph infection. And they didn't work. So I thought, okay, well, like this is not good, So I actually went back to my naturopathic doctor and, I got put on a protocol of essential oils, which I won't go super into that. But I also had to look at, what other infections are in my body. And I had read a lot about cavitations and cavitation. I kind of wanted to touch on this too, because a lot of people with Lyme disease, they hold toxins and bacteria in their body in places they may not realize it. So I had cavitations within my mouth, and what cavitations are, in the most general sense, is if you've had a tooth removed or if you've had a root canal, it's basically the holes didn't heal properly from where they have done this, or from a root canal, you still have like the dead tissue in there. And what happens is your jaw starts to necrose or your jaw starts to decay. And so you're holding bacteria and viruses and all of these things within these, pockets in your mouth. And so I went to a holistic dentist here in San Diego, and, she was able to find that I had one cavitation. So, she had to go in basically like they would have wisdom tooth, but, sliced me open, and she said it, inside my jaw, it was just spongy, like jelly almost, because it was rotting away. And so as gruesome and disgusting as that sounds, this is also something that people with Lyme disease and chronic illnesses need to be aware of is, their tooth and gum health. And after I got the cavitation surgery and being on the essential oil protocols and, doing all of these things, like I'm finally better again. I have hit that second remission finally.
Have you tried anything else to treat your symptoms in the process, like CBD oil or using infrared saunas?
Yeah, I have my own little infrared sauna at home. It's a little portable one, low EMF waves. It was only a couple $100 off Amazon. I'm in there like every other night. There's certain like detox baths with Epsom salt and essential oils. I find turmeric, so it's the essential oil turmeric, but turmeric in any sense, I find is super helpful. I don't personally do CBD oil because of where I work, but I just always try to support myself with supplements, eating well. I make sure I get enough rest. Rest is just key. Good sleep and stuff like that. So, but yeah, when I feel bad, I try to stock up on the supplements or the anti-inflammatories like turmeric and stuff like that.
So on that note about where you work, so it sounds like from what you're saying, you're about 85% back to where you were before Lyme. Is that a correct assessment?
Yes. I'm feeling great again. I'm actually, my birthday's coming up. And so one of the things I want to do to celebrate is I want to run a 5K and, run the entire 3 miles. So I've recently been training for that.
Now, have you been able to return to work, have a social life?
So one of the things that I have realized through my Lyme disease journey, it's all about being kind to yourself, having boundaries, and learning how to say no. So right now, I have my dream job. When I was in remission, the first time I was able to get my dream job. I actually work for the Paralyzed Veterans of America, the PAVE program. So I'm an employment analyst, and in a nutshell, I help veterans in the military community find employment. During my first bout of remission, I was able to, land my dream job. And the hours are great. I found a job that really works with me and it's flexible and it pays well and everything like that. And I love it. I couldn't be happier. As far as the social life and stuff goes, before, and especially when I was in college, I was just out every night, partying, the center of attention, just going crazy. And, I'm a people pleaser. So if somebody invites me to do something, I'm like, yep, absolutely, and so it really all had to come to an end. And, the people that you surround yourself with, your social group, they have to understand that too, that, you're going to have to say no, and you have to put yourself first.
Tailor, what advice would you give to others who are currently in the throes of Lyme disease?
What I like to tell people is that you've got to listen to your body. You've got to be kind to it. You've got to give your body the best environment possible, so like I said, get out the toxins, put in the good, and get a right state of mind. And obviously, it's hard whenever you're that sick because, like you probably know, it's the brain fog, it's the ADD, it's, all of these things hitting you at once. And, you're in this fog. And I explain, my time with Lyme disease. I was on autopilot. I saw everything that was happening. I was laughing. I was carrying on with people. I was doing all these things. And I was just cruising on autopilot. I had no control of my life, and so I would tell people, listen to your body, question what question what you hear, stay off social media for the most part. I struggle with that, and I read stuff and it makes me mad, but, heal your mind too. Mental health is so important, and put yourself first. I also want to add, and we've kind of spoken about this before, the podcast started, about, how essential it is for, people with Lyme disease to have good support systems. And I kind of wanted to touch base on that. I have had a really up and down experience with support systems, and from first being diagnosed with mono or misdiagnosed with mononucleosis, and the whole 6 months when I was struggling with my health, I couldn't believe how many people brushed it off or, told me there's nothing wrong with you, or laughed at me. And this is coming from doctors. This is coming from my family. This is coming from, those, my friends and my peers and those closest to me. Is everybody would kind of just brush it off because I would, I have all these things wrong with me, and they'll be like, well, what'd the doctor say? And I'm like, well, the doctor's saying this. And then it was, I was labeled as you don't know what you're talking about, blah, 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 blah. So that's huge. If somebody is going through, health struggle like that, you listen to them, and, offer comfort, because a lot of times it takes you to figure out what is actually wrong. You have to be your own advocate. But I also wanted to, touch upon the fact of when you do get diagnosed with Lyme disease, when I first got diagnosed, everybody was very supportive, and everybody was like, oh my gosh, if you need anything, I'm here for you. And all these things, my close friends and my close family, but, that was it. And because Lyme disease isn't recognized really by the medical community, I've had doctors I've had to go to the ER a couple of times since being diagnosed with Lyme disease, and even doctors have been like, well, studies have proven that chronic Lyme disease doesn't exist, so you don't have that. And it's like, well, that's fine, but I've been, battling this for 2 years, whatever. So, once I got diagnosed with Lyme disease, everybody was really supportive. But then I found whenever I started going through treatment, because I wasn't doing things that everybody else saw as normal, because I was experimenting with these Chinese herbs, because I was doing these detox, because I stopped eating bread, everybody would kind of turn up their nose a little bit to me or think what I was doing was unorthodox or wouldn't work and, stuff like that, because it's against like the social norms, it's against the grain. And so one time I was out with friends, and so, they were all eating pizza, and I had to eat, it was like chickpeas, tuna and avocado or something. My, close friends made comments about the way it smelled or looked like dog food and stuff like that. And I thought to myself, like, would you be, saying these things if, I was 600 pounds and trying to lose weight, so I was eating this? And so no matter what, this person with a chronic illness or Lyme disease or whatever, no matter what they're trying to do to better themselves, like, you should never make them feel guilty for trying to, expand the longevity of their existence. So really be there for them. My ex-husband too, even though we're not together, like, he was such a big support system. He didn't understand it, but he never questioned me either in my knowledge and what I was doing. So I really appreciate that. He probably won't hear this, but I really appreciate that too. Now I surround myself with people who are positive. If they bring negativity into my life, they're out. And then on the other hand, I saw it in a meme, but one of the biggest things, it was like, one of the most caring things that somebody has ever said to me while I have a chronic illness, it was like, well, I researched your disease, and, this is what I found. Just taking the time to learn about like what somebody is going through and the hardships can really open a lot of doors. I know my mom, whenever I first got diagnosed with Lyme disease, it was a turning point for me and my health, but it was a turning point for her and how she saw, all of this, because I'm her baby, and so she has just taken a 100%, turn to how she views healthcare and getting better. And I love it, and we have these such engaging conversations about it. And I'm really thankful for the people that are in my life now. I'm currently in a relationship. He's amazing, super supportive. And so surround yourself with those who are going to enhance your ability to heal.
Thank you for listening to the Tick Bootcamp interview with guest Tailor Scott. To our listeners, we have a call to action. First, if you would like to learn more about Tailor Scott and her tick disease journey, please visit her Instagram at RichardsTailor34 or her Facebook page at Tailor Jade, facebook.com/Tailor.Richards.33671. Second, if you enjoyed this episode of the Tick Bootcamp podcast interview with Tailor Scott, please share it with your friends by using the social media buttons you see at the bottom of the post. Third, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play Music, or Spotify to get the automatic episode updates for our Tick Bootcamp podcast. And finally, please take a minute to leave an honest review and rating on iTunes. This is a new effort on our part, and we would really appreciate you helping us to develop the show you'd like to listen to. We make it a point to read every single one of the reviews we get. Thank you for listening.